For today's photography, I'm going to be needing my tripod and this special little filter, because I'm going to have my very first go at infrared photography. And it is my very first go. I've never taken any infrared images before, so it may all go horribly wrong, but it'll be an experiment, and I hope you'll enjoy coming along for it. If you enjoy this video and you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Infrared photography is one of those things that I've looked at before. I've admired other people's work, but I've never really given it a go. And I've always been, I think, a little bit reluctant to try it for two reasons. One is I'm not really sure that the creative approach to infrared photography is suited for me, but I won't know until I try. The other reason is a lot of the images that I've seen that I really like have featured trees, and because most of the trees, or nearly all of the trees around this part of Spain, are pine trees, I'm not sure how well that's going to work. I have done a bit of research into infrared photography and what it is before I've come out, but that doesn't mean I know what I'm actually doing. Normal photography is visible light, so that's roughly, don't quote me scientifically on this, but I think it's roughly around 320 to 720 nanometers wavelengths. Above 720 nanometers up to, I think, 1 millimeter wavelengths, we have infrared, which is basically heat. Now, the sensor in a digital camera can record infrared, but it's basically just completely swamped by the visible light, which is much, much stronger. And one of the ways that you can do infrared photography is to buy a little filter like this. This blocks everything below or shorter than 720 nanometers. So basically it lets through infrared and blocks everything out. Now what that means, of course, is that most of the light that would be coming into the camera is blocked, and therefore exposure times are going to be longer, potentially very long, and hence the need for the tripod to keep the images sharp. I do know that the infrared images require some additional steps in processing. For example, in Lightroom, you can't get a broad enough adjustment on white balance to correct the infrared effect. So what you need to do, and what I've already done, is downloaded a tool. This one is called a DNG profile editor. And when I've got my first infrared image, I'll have to take it into that and create a custom profile that Lightroom can use, which will basically extend the range of white balance that's available to me, so I can correct the massive red tinge that we're going to get. I also believe that I'm going to need to do some color channel swapping, specifically reds and blues. So the images will probably need to go into Photoshop before I do the final, touches and editing on them, to flip that around so that reds become blues and blues become reds. But all of that is after I've actually captured some images. And I've come out today to Mayadeta in Villajoyosa because there's loads of trees here. They are all pine trees, but there's loads of trees here. And I'm going to look at setting up and doing some photography, probably mostly featuring trees, and see what I actually get. I've set up a scene here using these two curved trees. There is another one in the background. Got some dead space in the foreground. Not got the camera all the way up on the tripod, just a little bit lower down to block out most of the background, because I don't want the background to be too much of a distraction. And I'm treating this as I would do a long exposure with, say, like a 10 stop, like a big stopper, a 10 stop filter. So I've set the composition up, had a look at the exposure, and then I'm going to put the filter on and see how many stops I need to go with it to, you know, get the correct exposure. I'm expecting it to be at least 10, maybe more, but I won't know until I actually get it set up. Of course, the problem is we've got a little bit of a breeze here, and I don't really want the trees to go blurry if I can help it, but at the moment it's reasonably calm. So without the filter on, f8 ISO 100, 1/320th of a second. I'm on my 11-22 lens at about 13.5, 14 millimeters. So it's time to put the filter on and then maybe just take a couple of test shots to see where it works out. And then I'll know for the next one, you know, how many stops I need to add. Okay, that's the filter on. I made sure I switched to manual focus. So I've pre-focused and switched to manual focus. Now it's time to dial in. I'm not sure how reliable the histogram is going to be on this, with it blocking the normal visible wavelengths. I'm going to try 30 seconds and see what that looks like. 2-second timer. Well, on the back of the camera it looks very red, but then I expected that. It's obviously going to need some work. What's the exposure look like? I mean, that exposure looks pretty good. There's no highlight warnings. The histogram is over to the right, which is what I would like. So that's, let's see. Well, that's 13 and a bit stops. So yeah, it's definitely blocking a lot. Whether that's because I only bought a cheap filter to try this out, so it might be, you know, a better filter would be better, I don't know. I'm going to take a couple of shots here trying to time it for when the wind isn't blowing. And of course then these images, as I said, will have to go through that special processing workflow. Sorry, future me, who's now had the benefit of looking at and trying to edit the images from the photo shoot, feels the need to chip in at this point. I mentioned a concern about how suitable the trees here, the pine trees here, would be for infrared photography, because I know that the deciduous trees have quite a lot of heat generated in the leaves. And pine trees, of course, don't have leaves, they have needles, and they don't generate the same kind of heat. Well, when I got the images back onto the computer and I ran through the kind of recommended workflow, I realised that I had a bit of a challenge, because the images, when they're corrected and go through the normal process, basically just lack punch. You know, those vibrant colours, the glow that you normally expect to see in foliage on an infrared image just wasn't there. So I've sort of had to play around with the images and experimented with different ways of processing them. So on some of them I've completely corrected the white balance, and I've put them through the process to swap the blue and red colour channels. On others I've only partially corrected the white balance and either put them through the blue and red swap or not. And on one image, in fact the first one, I've also played around with one of the hues. I've played around with the cyan hue to try and give the image a bit more impact. This is a tree that I photographed last time I was here. Then I did a couple of shots of it with a fisheye lens. I can't use the fisheye lens today because there's no way to put filters on it. But what I can do is use my 11-22 lens, wide angle. Still going to do it as a vertical orientation shot, exactly the same as I did before. I've set my composition up focused, and at the moment f8 1/640th of a second, so I should be able to get a 15-second exposure with the infrared filter on. And again, it's going to be a case of waiting for the breeze to drop and hopefully capture a shot of the tree while it's not blowing around. Getting a bit of lens flare on this one because of the position of the sun. I'm going to use my hat to try and block that. So just there, should hopefully do it. Got to try not to move now for 15 seconds. I'm actually wondering what a dead tree looks like in infrared, and I found quite a nice one here. I've sort of looked at possibilities of getting very low down to shoot it, sort of shooting much more up at the sky, but I don't actually think it helps that much. I want to try to get, there's another dead tree kind of behind it. I want to get that in the right position in the frame as well. And then there are some living trees kind of in the background and off to the sides. So I'm just going to refine the composition a bit, and then we'll see about putting the filter on and taking a shot. It's going to be a 30-second exposure, but I don't have to worry too much about things moving. It's reasonably sheltered here. I think one more thing that I want to try is a building, and I've got the tower here. I'm going to include this kind of interesting shaped tree that's in the scene here as well. Unfortunately, that does mean there's going to be a rubbish bin in there as well, but I can probably clone that out. The exposure time without the filter is 1/1000th of a second, so I should be able to get away with maybe 10 seconds. Let's put the filter on and see. I'm going to do one more shot, but it's not infrared. I've just spotted a band of cloud sitting about a third of the way down from the top of Campana Mountain. Grab the telephoto lens. I'm going to do a handheld shot of it because I can get a fast exposure time. Should look quite interesting. There's also actually one bit of cloud sitting over the top. If it's moving right to left, it might be worth hanging on for a few seconds and seeing if it sits right away above the dip. Ah, perfect. This whole photo shoot was an experiment for me. So what have I learned? Well, those pine trees are not great subjects because they don't radiate heat the way that the leaves on deciduous trees do. You don't get the big colour shift which you can use to create interesting images in infrared. Basically they stay green. A little bit of a shift towards cyan, and I did use that in the first image by masking the foliage in the trees and then shifting cyan to pink, but that's kind of cheating. But I just really wanted to try to make something of the image. Also, because they don't have the radiated heat, you don't get the increase in luminance that would make black and white work. So if you convert these infrared images to black and white, they look like any other black and white, and ordinary black and white is a lot easier to shoot and process than infrared, so there's no point. I also learned that maybe this filter that I bought was a bad idea. I didn't want to spend a lot of money on an experiment, so I bought a fairly cheap filter, and what I noticed is some very uneven exposure where whole sections or a whole side or a whole area of the scene was very much darker than the other. That caused me some problems in processing the images, and what I noticed is that those darker areas very, very quickly degraded when I started processing the images, so much so that some of the images, by the time I'd done a white balance conversion, even a minor change in the tone of the image would create the kind of colour banding in the darker parts of the sky that you would normally associate with massively over processing an image. And as I don't normally see that with images from my camera, I'm inclined to think that this filter is degrading the quality to the point where you can't really do much in the way of adjustments. When I got home, I stuck this filter on a longer focal length on my telephoto lens, and it does appear that the uneven exposure disappears. So it might be that it would be possible to get some better images shooting at longer focal lengths. Am I going to do more infrared photography going forward? Well, I've got to say, none of the images that I shot in infrared on this photo shoot are particularly grabbing me. In fact, the image that I liked the best from the afternoon was the handheld, non-infrared black and white shot of the mountain and the clouds. But I don't like to give up too easily. So what I will probably do is wait a few months, get into spring or summer, see if I can find some better subjects or alternative subjects to use to shoot for infrared. Maybe still try with this filter, but shoot at longer focal lengths and see if I can get some better results that way. And then if I find that it looks like it's something I'd want to do, I'll invest in a better filter and see if that solves some of my problems. In the meantime, that's it. I'm going to wrap the video up. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please give it a like, share it on social media, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. Maybe you've got some experience of infrared that you'd like to share. And if you want to see what I'm doing in the future, then if you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button before you go. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. So thank you very much. And until the next video, bye.